I was standing at the altar in my ivory dress when the man in the gray suit walked up the aisle. 110 guests went quiet all at once. I felt the pressure change in the room, the air before a storm. Dorian's easy smile started to falter somewhere around the third row. I apologize for the interruption, the man said. Dorian Ashcroft, Morgane Delacroix. I have documents for both of you related to an active investigation by the Colorado Attorney General's office into Meridian Peaks Capital and Ashcroft Voss Holdings. Morgane's face went the color of the tablecloths. Dorian didn't move at all, which was somehow worse. His hand had a small visible tremor when he took the papers, something I had never once seen from him in 3 years. Morgane looked at me before she looked at the document. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was closer to the look of someone doing math very fast and not liking the answer. She was still holding my bouquet in her other hand. She didn't seem to know what to do with either. I stood at the front of that arch in my ivory dress and I said the only thing I had planned to say. I hope it was worth it. I didn't wait for either of them to answer. I turned to my father, who was already on his feet, already offering his arm again, and I walked back down that aisle past 110 silent guests, past my mother with her hand pressed flat against her mouth, past my fiancé's mother frozen mid-rise from her seat with an expression I couldn't begin to read. I did not run. I walked the same steady pace I'd walked in on, because some things you get to choose even when everything else has already been chosen for you. Let me start where the story actually starts. My name is Isolde Hartwell. I am a senior structural engineer for the City of Denver, Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. My job, in the simplest terms, is to find the places where something is about to fail before it actually does. I learned to look for those places from my grandfather, Gideon Calloway. He was a bridge foreman for 31 years, the kind of man who wore his flannel shirts until the elbows went soft and thin, and who could tell you the load rating of a 2-lane bridge just by walking across it and feeling how it moved under his boots. When I was 10 years old, he pressed a steel tape measure into my hand in his garage in Golden, the yellow paint already worn down to bare metal at the corners, his initials scratched into the case with the tip of a nail. Measure twice, he told me. Not because you don't trust your eyes, because you respect the thing you're building. He died when I was 19, in the middle of my second year at the Colorado School of Mines. I still have that tape measure in the top drawer of my desk at work. I have never once needed it for an actual job. I keep it anyway. My mother, Cressida Hartwell, still has his old cedar toolbox in her garage in Lakewood. My father, Matthias, married into that family of quiet, careful people and became one of them, more or less, over 35 years of marriage. I grew up in a house where nobody raised their voice, where dinner was at 6, and where the highest compliment anyone could pay you was well built. I met Dorian Ashcroft at a benefit dinner in April 3 years ago for a nonprofit that rebuilds footbridges in mountain towns that lose them to flooding. I was there because my department had donated engineering hours to one of their projects outside Lyons. He was there because his company, Meridian Peaks Capital, had put up part of the funding. He found me at the dessert table, looking, I'm sure, deeply unimpressed by the past hors d'oeuvres. You're the one who keeps correcting the load numbers on the slideshow under your breath, he said. I hadn't realized I was doing it out loud. He had dark hair going silver early at the temples, an easy laugh, and the kind of unhurried confidence that made rooms rearrange themselves slightly around him. He asked me actual questions about actual bridges and then listened to the actual answers, which, in my experience of Denver's dating pool, put him in a category of 1. We talked for 40 minutes. He got my number by asking for my business card and then texting it instead of calling, which I later told him was the smartest thing he did all night. We dated for a year before he asked me to move into his townhouse on Wynkoop Street, 3 blocks from Union Station, all exposed brick and steel beams that I privately approved of on site. He introduced me at parties as Isolde, she keeps the bridges from falling down, and he said it like he meant it, every time, not like a line he polished. His mother, Vesper Ashcroft, was a different kind of welcome entirely. The first dinner I had at her house in Cherry Creek, she looked at my hands across the table, at the calluses along my palm from field harnesses and rebar, and said, "You have a working woman's hands." She said it the way you'd comment on weather. Dorian laughed it off in the car. She grew up with nothing and married up, he said. She judges everyone's hands. Ignore her. I did, mostly. It's easy to ignore one comment when everything else feels solid. My best friend, Morgane Delacroix, thought Vesper was hilarious. Morgane and I had been roommates at CU Boulder, 2 years in a dorm room that smelled permanently of burnt popcorn, and 13 years of friendship since. She was a marketing director now, magnetic in the specific way that made strangers want to tell her things, the kind of woman who remembered everyone's coffee order and everyone's worst breakup and used both generously in your favor. She was there the night I met Dorian. She was the one who elbowed me toward the dessert table in the first place. The three of us spent that first year doing everything together. Trivia nights at a bar on Blake Street, a ski weekend in Breckenridge where Morgane broke her wrist and made us sign the cast. Sunday dinners at my parents' house where my mother would set an extra place without being asked because that was just what Cressida Hartwell did for people she liked. I never thought about it the way I think about it now. I didn't clock the way Morgane would lean into Dorian's shoulder when she laughed at something he said. I didn't clock how often he texted her to check on Isolde during long field weeks when I was 3 states away inspecting a bridge deck. I have gone back through that year in my head more times than I want to admit, and I still can't find the exact moment where the ground started to shift. That's the part that stays with me, not the fall. The part where I was standing on it the whole time and didn't feel it move. He proposed in October up at an overlook near Golden he knew I loved, the kind of clear fall evening where you can see all the way to the front range without a single cloud in the way. No production. No hired photographer hiding in the bushes. Just him, a ring, and a question asked plainly. I said yes before he finished the sentence. I called my mother from the parking lot afterward, and she cried the good kind of tears. And my father got on the phone and said, "Well, it's about time," which for Matthias Hartwell is practically a wedding toast. We set the date for the following June. A ceremony at Sundial Ridge, a converted barn venue outside Golden with a view of the exact overlook where he proposed. Small. 110 guests. I asked Morgane to be my maid of honor before we'd even left the parking lot at the overlook, and she screamed loud enough that Dorian said his ears rang for an hour. I thought I had built something that would hold. That's the thing about my work. I know exactly how to find a hairline crack in a steel girder before it becomes a collapse. I know how to read the small signs. What I did not know, apparently, was how to apply any of that to my own life. I need to tell you about the loan paperwork before I tell you about anything else, because everything after only makes sense once you understand what I signed. Meridian Peaks Capital was Dorian's company, a real estate crowdfunding platform he'd built with his business partner, Lucian Voss, a lean, quiet man I'd met maybe 6 times in 3 years and never once had a real conversation with. Their pitch was simple. Everyday investors could put small amounts of money into large commercial developments they'd otherwise never have access to. Dorian talked about it the way some men talk about their kids. I believed in it because I believed in him. In March, 3 months before the wedding, he came home with a stack of papers on a Saturday morning and told me the bank needed both our signatures to refinance the townhouse. Something about combining our finances ahead of the wedding, cleaner for tax purposes, his accountant's idea. I had come off a stretch of 14-hour days inspecting a bridge deck out past Idaho Springs, the kind of week where you fall asleep mid-sentence and wake up in your own driveway not remembering the last 5 minutes of the drive. He had a pen in my hand before I'd made it past the second page. "It's just the refinance," he said. "Same as we talked about." I signed it. I did not read it the way I read a bridge inspection report, line by line, load by load. I signed it the way you sign something when you trust the person handing it to you completely, which is to say, quickly, and without the part of my brain that finds hairline cracks turned on at all. What I felt, standing in our kitchen with a pen still in my hand, was smaller than a doubt. It was just a flicker. I held breath half a second too long, right before he said, "Same as we talked about," even though we hadn't, not really, not in any detail I could remember. I let it go. I was standing in a life that looked from every angle I checked completely sound. My mother adored him. My father called him solid, which for Matthias Hartwell is the structural engineering equivalent of a marriage blessing. Morgane had picked out 3 different bridesmaid dresses in shades of sage and made me try on all of them twice. I filed the flicker away the way you file away a hairline crack that isn't in a load-bearing spot. Worth noting. Not yet worth stopping the project over. The wedding planning moved fast after that. I picked my dress at a bridal shop in Cherry Creek North with Morgane sitting beside me on a velvet bench, dabbing her eyes at every single one I tried on, even the one with the broken zipper. She organized the bachelorette dinner herself, a private room at a restaurant on Larimer Square, hand-lettered menus with both our names on them. She sat with me through 2 alteration appointments. She was, in every way I could measure, exactly the friend she had always been. Vesper, for her part, warmed exactly as much as Vesper was capable of warming. She started calling Morgane such a grounded girl at family dinners, in a tone she never once used on me. I noticed it. I told myself it was just Vesper being Vesper. In May, a month before the wedding, I drove out to my parents' place in Lakewood for Sunday dinner. My mother had Gideon's old cedar toolbox open on the kitchen table, going through it for something, and she handed me his tape measure without a word, the way she did sometimes, just to let me hold it for a minute. I turned it over in my hand. The yellow paint was almost gone now. His initials were still scratched into the case, GC, a little deeper than I remembered. He always said the failures you catch early are cheap, my mother said, watching me hold it. It's the ones you miss that cost you everything. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I put the tape measure back in the drawer of my desk at work the following Monday. What I found next took me 3 weeks to fully understand, though I didn't know that yet, standing barefoot on my own kitchen floor at 11 at night. It arrived the way these things always arrive, mixed in with a stack of catalogs and a water bill, addressed to both of us, the joint account from the March refinance. I only opened it because Dorian was in Breckenridge for the weekend on a site visit and I was catching up on mail I usually let him sort. I wasn't looking for anything. I was looking for the water bill. There was a wire transfer dated the second week of April. $41,000 moved out of the joint account into something called Ashcroft Voss Holdings. I read the line 3 times. I didn't recognize the name. I didn't recognize the transaction. I definitely didn't recognize giving anyone permission to move $41,000 anywhere. I called Dorian. He picked up on the second ring, sounding easy, unbothered, the way he always sounded. It's a short-term transfer, he said. Lucian and I set up a holding entity for a new development parcel outside Castle Rock. It's temporary. It'll be back in the account before the wedding, I promise. You didn't tell me. I didn't want to bore you with the logistics of my own company, he said, and he laughed a little when he said it. Warm, easy, the exact last that had made a room rearrange itself around him the night I met him. You'd have signed off on it anyway, you always do. I sat with that sentence for a long time after we hung up. You always do. As if my trust were a rubber stamp he kept in a drawer somewhere, available whenever he needed it. I let it go, again. I told myself it was a business thing, the kind of thing that happens in commercial real estate, the kind of thing I genuinely did not have the expertise to question the way I could question a load calculation. I am very good at finding cracks in steel. I have never claimed to be good at finding cracks in people. 2 weeks later, at a dinner at Vesper's house in Cherry Creek, I overheard something I was not supposed to hear. I'd gone looking for the bathroom and taken a wrong turn down the hallway past Vesper's study, and the door was cracked open, and I heard her voice low, the tone she used when she thought no one important was listening. Just make sure Isolde doesn't ask about the parcel numbers before the wedding, she was saying. Once the accounts are combined properly, none of this matters anyway. And then Dorian's voice, quieter than I'd ever heard it. She won't ask. She trusts me. I stood in that hallway for maybe 4 seconds. It felt considerably longer. I didn't walk in. I didn't confront anyone. I walked back down the hall, found the actual bathroom, ran the tap for a minute so my face would have a reason to look flushed, and went back to the table and ate the rest of my salmon like a person whose whole life wasn't quietly tilting sideways. That's the part I still don't fully forgive myself for. Not that I trusted him. Everyone trusts someone eventually. It's that I heard something wrong with my own ears and I still chose to finish my salmon. The next conversation changed everything, but not the way you'd expect, and it didn't come from Dorian at all. It came from my mother, on a Tuesday over the phone, while I was sitting in my city truck outside a pedestrian bridge on Spear Boulevard that I'd flagged the week before for a hairline fracture near the north abutment. I found something going through your grandfather's papers, she said. I want you to have it before the wedding, not after. It was a ledger. Gideon Calloway had kept meticulous financial records his entire life, and my mother had found a page near the back, dated 11 years before he died, where he'd written a single paragraph about trust and paper and the difference between the two. A man's word is worth exactly as much as his willingness to show you the math, he'd written. I have known good men who lied about numbers because they believed, truly believed, the lie would work out fine in the end. Don't marry a man's charm. Marry his ledger. My mother read it to me over the phone, and I sat in my truck outside that bridge with a hairline fracture, and I felt something in my chest that I can only describe as the exact feeling I get when a load calculation doesn't add up, no matter how many times I run it. I did not tell her about the wire transfer. I did not tell her about the hallway outside Vesper's study. Some things need to sit before you say them out loud to the people who love you. The following weekend, Dorian and I had one of the best days we'd had in months. He took the day off. We drove up to Golden, to the overlook where he'd proposed, and we sat on the tailgate of his truck and ate sandwiches from a shop on the main street, and he told me about a hiking trail his father used to take him on before he died, a story I'd never heard in 3 years of dating him. He looked at me like I was the only fixed point in the spinning world. I let my guard down completely that day. That's the part nobody warns you about. The good days don't stop coming just because something underneath the relationship has already started to fail. Sometimes the good days get better right before everything breaks, and you mistake the brightness for proof that you were wrong to worry in the first place. I put my grandfather's ledger in the drawer of my desk at work, right next to his tape measure, and I told myself I would come back to both of them when I had more information. I had no idea how much more information was 3 weeks away from finding me. This is where things started to get strange, and it started with a Tuesday I nearly let pass like any other. I was at my desk at Dotai, 3 weeks before the wedding, cross-referencing inspection reports with my colleague Petra Lindquist. She picked up the tape measure off my desk, turned it over once, and said, "You never actually use this, do you?" "Not for work," I said. "So why keep it out?" I didn't have a good answer for her. That night I drove home to the Wingcube townhouse. Dorian was out with Lucian, a dinner meeting he said would run late. I made myself dinner alone, and for reasons I still can't fully explain. I got up afterward and went looking for his laptop bag. Not because I suspected anything specific, but because the feeling in my chest that night was the same feeling I get standing under a bridge that passes every visual inspection but still feels wrong under my boots. I found a folder inside a zipper pocket I'd never opened before. Manila, slightly bent at one corner, the way paper gets when someone has shoved it somewhere they didn't want it found. Inside were printed bank statements. 3 months of them from an account I had never seen, opened at a credit union in Castle Rock in the name of Ashcroft Voss Holdings LLC. I sat down on the kitchen floor. Right there on the tile, my back against the cabinet under the sink. I didn't cry, I just sat there and read. The account showed the $41,000 transfer from our joint account in April. It also showed 2 more transfers I had never known about, $18,000 in February and $22,000 in January, both pulled from a home equity line that had been opened on the townhouse. A line of credit that required my signature. My signature, which I now understood, sitting on that floor I had given on a Saturday morning in March without reading past the second page. Underneath the bank statements was something worse. A formation document for Ashcroft Voss Holdings, dated 14 months earlier, long before Dorian had ever proposed to me. 2 names on it. Dorian Ashcroft. And Morgaine de Lacroix, not Lucian Voss. Morgaine. I read it 3 times. The way I read a stress report I don't want to believe. The name didn't change. Morgaine de Lacroix, listed as a managing member, with an ownership percentage right next to Dorian's, nearly identical. I thought about the sage bridesmaid dresses. I thought about the hand-lettered bachelorette menus. I thought about her leaning into his shoulder at Sunday dinners. 100 small moments I had filed away as nothing. Each one a hairline fracture I hadn't been trained to see because I never once thought to look for cracks in the 2 people I trusted most. I photographed every page with my phone before I put the folder back exactly where I'd found it. My hands were steady the entire time. 11 years of surgical precision fieldwork will do that to you. You learn to keep your hands steady even when the rest of you is coming apart. I sat on that kitchen floor for a long time after I'd finished photographing everything. I thought about my grandfather's ledger entry. Don't marry a man's charm. Marry his ledger. I finally had the ledger. I need to tell you about the 2 weeks that followed before I tell you what I did with what I found, because those 2 weeks were where I stopped being someone this had happened to and started being someone who was going to do something about it. I didn't confront Dorian. Not yet. I went to work the next morning and inspected a highway overpass in Aurora with a hairline crack in the North Pier that I flagged, documented and photographed from 6 different angles before I filed a report, because that is what you do with a crack. You document it completely before you decide how serious it is. I applied the same standard to my own life. I opened a new email account on a personal device Dorian had never touched, and I started building a folder. The photographed bank statements, the formation documents, screenshots of text threads with Morgan going back 8 months, ordinary at a glance, can't wait to see the venue, and sage or dusty blue for the dress, except now I was reading them differently. I called Naomi Bellwether, a family law attorney a colleague had used during her own divorce 2 years earlier. Naomi had a small office above a coffee shop on South Broadway and a way of listening that didn't perform sympathy. I laid the folder out for her in order. She read through it twice without saying much. Then she set her pen down. "This is one of the most organized case files I've seen from someone who isn't a lawyer," she said. 3 things before we go further. First, that home equity signature is a problem for him, not you, if you can show you were misled about what you were signing. Second, you need to talk to financial crimes before you talk to him, because if this is what it looks like, you may be a witness to fraud against outside investors too. Third, she paused. You don't have to go to that wedding to find out the rest. You could walk away right now with what you already have. I sat with that for a long moment. Then I said, I know, but I want to see their faces when they understand that I already know. Detective Alistair Doyle from the Colorado Attorney General's office called me 4 days later. He told me Meridian Peaks had 3 outside investors who'd filed complaints in the last 2 months, all citing missing disbursement records, all pointing at the same holding entity I'd found in Dorian's bag. We'd been building toward a filing, Alistair told me. Your documentation moves the timeline up considerably. Can I ask, do you have a wedding date coming up? June 14th, I said. At Sundial Ridge, outside Golden. There was a pause on the line. That's useful to know, he said. I may need to reach you that day. I didn't ask him what he meant by that. Some part of me already knew. The 2 weeks before the wedding, I did something my grandfather would have understood better than anyone else in my life. I kept showing up. I went to the final dress fitting. I sat through the seating chart argument with Vesper about table placement. I let Morgane plan the last bridesmaid brunch, and I sat across from her at a restaurant on Larimer Square and watched her laugh at something one of the other bridesmaids said, and I felt nothing but a strange, cold clarity. I was not performing forgiveness. I was gathering the last of what I needed. There is a difference between being patient and being a placeholder, and for the first time in my life, I understood exactly which one I had been. 3 days before the wedding, I received one more envelope in the mail. This one addressed only to me, no return address, postmarked from Golden. Inside was a single photocopied page from a much older ledger. My mother had found it going through the rest of Gideon's papers and mailed it without calling first, because she said afterward she didn't trust herself not to cry on the phone. It was dated the year I was born. My grandfather had written one line about me, a 19-year-old prediction he never got to see proven true or false. This one measures twice. She always will. Whatever she builds will hold. I read it standing in my own kitchen, in the exact spot where I'd once sat on the floor reading someone else's lies. I folded the page carefully and put it in my bag for the wedding. I didn't know yet exactly how I'd use it. I just knew I wasn't going anywhere without it. June 14th was the kind of clear, high-altitude morning Colorado does better than almost anywhere else. No clouds past the foothills. The kind of light my grandfather used to call measuring light, because you could see every true line of a structure in it, no shadows to hide behind. I got ready at Sundial Ridge with my mother and Aunt Patricia in a small room off the main barn, string lights already glowing faintly even though the sun wouldn't set for another 11 hours. Morgane arrived late, hair still wet from the shower, apologizing about traffic on 93. She zipped my dress. Her hands were steady. Mine were steadier. I had photocopies of everything in a plain white envelope tucked into my overnight bag, along with my grandfather's tape measure in the folded page my mother had mailed me. At 1:40, a man in a plain gray suit approached the check-in table. Alistair Doyle. Ms. Hartwell, he said. I wanted to reach you before the ceremony, not during it if I could help it. We're filing this afternoon. I wanted you to have the choice, whether you want to be standing there when it happens, or whether you'd rather I wait until you're somewhere else. I thought about my grandfather's tape measure sitting in my bag 6 feet away. I thought about a 19-year-old prediction he never got to see proven true. This one measures twice. Whatever she builds will hold. I'll be standing there, I said. I walked out on my father's arm at 2:11. Dorian's face, when he saw me, did the thing it always did, that unguarded softening I used to think was the realest thing about him. I walked the length of the aisle, looking at that softness and thinking about a formation document with 2 names on it, one of which belonged to the maid of honor standing at the front in sage green holding my bouquet. I reached the arch. My father kissed my cheek and sat down. The officiant opened his book. That's when Alistair Doyle walked up the aisle from the back, unhurried, a thin folder in his hand. The room noticed him before he'd made it halfway. That's the thing about 110 people gone quiet at once. It has a texture to it, a pressure change, like the air before a storm. Dorian's easy expression started to falter somewhere around the 3rd row. I apologize for the interruption, Alistair said, his voice perfectly calm. Dorian Ashcroft, Morgane Delacroix. I have documents for both of you related to an active investigation by the Colorado Attorney General's Office into Meridian Peaks Capital and Ashcroft Voss Holdings. Morgane's face went the color of the tablecloths. Dorian didn't move at all, which was somehow worse. Mr. Ashcroft. Alistair held out the first document. Dorian took it. His hand had a small, visible tremor I had never once seen from him in 3 years. Miss Delacroix. Morgane looked at me before she looked at the document. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was closer to the look of someone doing math very fast and not liking the answer. She took the papers. She was still holding my bouquet in her other hand. She didn't seem to know what to do with either. I stood at the front of that arch in my ivory dress with my grandfather's tape measure in the overnight bag 6 feet away, and I said the only thing I had planned to say. I hope it was worth it. I didn't wait for either of them to answer. I turned to my father, who was already on his feet, already offering his arm again, and I walked back down that aisle past 110 silent guests, past my mother with her hand pressed flat against her mouth, past Vesper Ashcroft frozen mid-rise from her seat with an expression I couldn't begin to read and didn't particularly want to. I did not run. I walked the same steady pace I'd walked in on, because some things you get to choose even when everything else has already been chosen for you. I need to take a breath here because what happened in the 2 weeks after that ceremony was a different kind of thing entirely. Quieter, slower, the kind of unraveling that doesn't happen in a single afternoon in front of witnesses. I staged my parents' house in Lakewood the first 4 nights. My mother didn't ask me questions I wasn't ready to answer. She just made coffee in the mornings and left me alone with it on the back porch, where I could see the foothills going gold at sunrise. Naomi filed on my behalf within the week, formally separating my name from every joint account and the home equity line, flagging the March signature as obtained under material misrepresentation, with my photograph documentation as Exhibit 1. Alistair's office moved fast once the wedding filing became public. 2 more investors came forward within days of the story circulating. I drove home. The radio was off the whole way, the first time I'd gone back to the Wynkoop townhouse since the folder in the leather bag. Dorian's things were still there, half packed in boxes his attorney had apparently advised him to leave for the divorce filing. I didn't look through any of it. I just packed my own boxes and left the rest exactly where it sat. The civil case took 6 months. I'll tell you what mattered. The home equity signature held up in my favor, exactly as Naomi predicted, and I recovered the full amount pulled from that line, $39,000 in restitution ordered by the court. The joint account transfers were harder, tangled up in the larger criminal investigation, but I recovered 31 of the 41,000 within a settlement, with the remainder pending as part of the broader fraud case against Ashcroft Foss Holdings. Meridian Peaks Capital was formally dissolved by a Delaware County court in the fall. 3 outside investors filed separate civil suits beyond the criminal complaint. Wush and Voss, it turned out, had known nothing about the holding entity at all, had been quietly pushed out of decision-making months before I ever found that folder, and ended up testifying against Dorian as part of his own effort to avoid liability. Dorian pled to 2 counts of securities fraud in the spring, a plea deal that kept him out of trial but not out of a felony record. Morgane's role was smaller, civil rather than criminal, but her marketing firm let her go within a month of the story reaching her industry, which in a city the size of Denver moves faster than anyone expects. I did not feel triumphant when I heard any of it. I felt tired, mostly, and then slowly, over the months that followed, something that started to resemble relief. Vesper Ashcroft called me once in September on a Tuesday evening. I almost didn't answer. I didn't know about the money, she said. I want you to know that. I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, Vesper, with respect, I don't think that's actually the thing you owe me an apology for. She didn't say anything else. She hung up a few seconds later. I set my phone face down on the counter and made a cup of tea and watched the steam rise and didn't feel the need to call her back. I moved into a 2-bedroom bungalow in the Berkeley neighborhood that October. High ceilings, original hardwood, a landlord who fixed things the same week you reported them. I keep my grandfather's tape measure on my desk at work. Same drawer, same spot it's always been. I added something new to that drawer this year. The photocopy page my mother mailed me, the one with his prediction about me written the year I was born. I read it sometimes on hard days. I got a dog that winter, a rescue mutt with one folded ear named Gerder, which made my father laugh so hard the first time I said it out loud that he had to sit down. I don't have a tidy conclusion about love or trust, and I'd stopped expecting one. What I have is this. I inspect bridges for a living. I find the hairline fractures before they become collapses, and I've gotten very good at it. Good enough that a highway overpass on Spear Boulevard is still standing today, because I caught something no one else looked closely enough to see. I used to think that made me too careful for my own personal life, too slow to trust, too much the engineer and not enough the person. But the morning I walked back down that aisle, past 110 silent guests, I was measuring exactly the way my grandfather taught me to. Twice. Carefully. Before I built anything on top of it again. 6 months after the ceremony that didn't finish, I stood on the pedestrian bridge on the Cherry Creek Trail, the one with the hairline stress fracture I'd flagged the spring before the wedding. The repair crew had closed the gap that morning. I walked across it on my lunch break just to feel it hold under my boots, the way my grandfather used to test every bridge he ever built. It held. Of course it held. I caught the problem in time. I started something this spring I didn't expect to start. A scholarship at my old high school in Golden, the Gideon Calloway Fund, for a graduating senior heading into engineering or a skilled trade. The first recipient was a girl named Marina, 17, who wants to build bridges in places that don't have good ones yet. I met her at the award ceremony in May. She asked me what the most important tool in my job was. I told her about a steel tape measure with worn yellow paint and initials scratched into the case, and what my grandfather told me the day he gave it to me. Measure twice, not because you don't trust your eyes, because you respect the thing you're building. I write it down now on the inside cover of every field notebook I start. I didn't used to, I do now. Here is the thing I wish someone had told me before any of this started. Love does not require you to lay down your own measurements. You are allowed to check. You are allowed to measure twice, even when you want to believe. Especially when you want to believe. Especially when you want to believe. Because love that cannot survive a second measurement is not love. It is a loan you were never going to get back. My grandfather said the truth has weight. I didn't know until I held it in my hands that the heaviest truth is the one you already knew and chose not to measure twice. I carry his tape measure in my desk drawer now. I measure everything twice. Not because I don't trust the world, but because I finally trust myself enough to check, write it down. Measure twice. Whatever you build after that, if you build it honestly, will hold.